Hey guys, when we last left off, I've been returning the data as JSON, just showing you the ways I'm approaching returning JSON, just kind of talking through other ways you could go about it. Since our app is API only, we chose to use Active Model Serializers. It's a third-party gem. You add your gem file. It's called Active Model Serializers. With it, we are returning JSON in the controller, basically just as objects. And then when the objects come back, they get piped through our serializers. And the serializer basically hijacks what's coming back and just returns what you pass here. So we've got the ID and name on the band, and then we pass this has many members, which allows us to associate all the members of the bands that we've added manually, I should say, and those come back in the sub object called members in the parent object. So kind of complex, but also very powerful and very nice because all that is happening with very little code under the hood. So it's pretty great. What I want to talk about in this video is routing and how you would kind of approach maybe doing a basic API for your app. Since we are in API mode, our routes are going to be a little different in Rails. So we can go back and look at the routes by going to Rails info routes in the URL. And we're going to have our basic API that you might be used to, just the routing based on your get and post and put, patch, delete, all those kind of HTTP requests. But what if we want to namespace this? Like if your app is only API, maybe you want to version it because that's kind of a good trend to take on. If you ever need to change an API, you don't want to just break everything for people using an old version. And a common convention is to version that. And the way you would do that with Rails is pretty simple. So we'll start in the routes file to show you by example. So I have my resources, bands, members, all this stuff, where essentially I can create Restful Routing. So if I want to create a band, I can by doing a post request to the band's path that we just saw on the URLs. That can happen via Ajax. It can happen across the server somehow. Whatever you're doing, it's fine. If you want to do a front-end app, maybe in React or something, this would be a way to approach it since it's the API-driven backend. So with that in mind, we want to start with a namespace here, and I'm going to call it API just because, I mean, obviously it's an API by default. You could probably forego this since our app is API-based, like I said. But if we add the namespace, now suddenly we get the, I need to do a do block. I just realized do. Now we get a wrapper around all the URLs that starts with API, which is a nice, I guess, convention to have. And if you wanted to version it, you could do just the same. So if you say namespace v1 do end, just essentially nest everything in version 1. So now we essentially have a versioned API, which is great. And the problem that might throw you off here is now that our controllers are in the app, we actually need them to be in the scope of the API. So since we have a bands controller here, I would need to add a members one. I only added the model in the last video, but I won't go that deep. But you would add another folder here called API, and then in that one called V1, another one. So V1. Then you want to change your controllers to live there. So each version, you're going to basically duplicate these files and, you know, come through with that association intact. So now, since we've done the namespace, we need to still accommodate and inherit from these classes. So we're basically passing this down through the app to go inherit from the application controller, which is right here, which is inheriting from the API itself. So that's a mouthful, but essentially all I wanted to do is organize that into using a certain namespace. So if we ever wanted to v2 this, you could essentially just copy these, keep the API namespace, come down here, v2, and maybe you move members outside of bands or something, and then keep this as is. Now your V1 and V2 are separate. So we've got all these routes that just are coming baked with the app, and it's just kind of set up for success in that case. Now, there's different ways to approach using an API, and I think this is the most common pattern you've run into. Stripe might do something a little bit different where they save the version of API to your actual account that you set up. So whenever you basically log in or use your keys associated with your account, they extract what API version you're using and then point you in the right direction as you're leveraging their APIs, which they have quite a few at this point, like 14 or something. I don't even know. But yeah, that's the approach. It's very simple in the Rails space. Some people confuse this as being very complicated. Like when you create a Rails app, all of a sudden you need a whole new app for an API or something. And in reality, you just need different routing and separate controllers, perhaps. So in our API's sake, we have all API-based stuff here that's just returning JSON. If this weren't a Rails API app, we could just have basic base controllers that return HTML too. So that's the beauty of the framework. I think you can do both and have this one place to really focus on the app and kind of make it, work. So no matter what you need, whether it's HTML or JSON or whatever response, you can accommodate with Rails. So that's a quick tip. Hopefully that's helpful with getting your API set up. You can just use this as maybe just a guide to get you going with your own API if you're into that sort of thing. So I'm actually on the side kind of considering going into a React native app for a project I'm working on. And this will be an approach I'll probably take going forward with that. So I need to still not nail down authentication on this stuff. So I'll do a follow-up guide on that, but look for that soon.